Welcome back to Conversations with Dr. Garraway. My name is Dr. Andrea Garraway, and throughout the season, we have been talking about relationship dynamics. For this specific episode, we are speaking on marriage and family. This is an area that I'm quite passionate about. I do a lot of work in this space, and I wanted to bring in a different voice that adds some dynamics to the conversation. So I invited my pastor, my friend, Mr. Brent James. I don't call him Brent James on an everyday average, so that's kind of weird for me. But Mr. Brent James, soon to be the Honorable Doctor, he's also passionate about this work, and he has a lot to contribute as he is somewhat of an expert here, as well as other areas that he is quite prolific in. So before we dive in, I would like to give Mr. James an opportunity to introduce himself to our audience. Mr. James.
Good morning, and let me say thank you, Dr. Garraway, for having me here to share in this conversation with Dr. Garraway. Just a little bit about myself. I really don't like to talk about myself, but I'm a pastor at heart, and I prefer that term as opposed to a minister of religion. It really talks about your pastoral role and responsibility. And that is how I see myself, a pastor at heart. I've been a pastor for 20 years. I'm also a school administrator. And I'm married to Arlene and father of two children, Arbonique, Don Jordan. And I enjoy being a pastor, I enjoy being a father and a husband, and among other things that I do. And that's, I would say, a little bit about who I am. I hope that will suffice for my introduction.
Thank you for being here, Mr. James. Lots of great information. What does marriage and family work look like for you as a pastor?
It is, let me say, marriage is demanding. Marriage is demanding. And at the same time, it is also rewarding. Demanding, I believe, because so many persons take it for granted that once two persons in a marriage relationship love each other, that everything is going to work out and be all right. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Part of that work has to be on self, first and foremost, as well as to ensure the health and survival of the marriage. Of course, I believe this is God's ordained way for families to exist in a context that glorifies Him. But for me, what does marriage and family look like? Very demanding, and one has to create a balance between work and marriage, work and family, to ensure that your marriage, your family takes precedence over work, while understanding the value of work. Because if your marriage isn't functioning the way you would like it to function, then certainly work, how you perform at work, is going to be less than desirable. So there's a lot of work that just needs to go in. Understanding who you are, what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths, working on yourself first, and ensuring that you take the responsibility to ensure that your relationship is healthy and is surviving. Of course, the other partner also has the responsibility.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks for that. A hot topic that has resurfaced here recently is placement in the family. Do you believe that children should be the most important family, the most important members of the family? Share your position on that.
No, I don't believe children should be the most important members of the family. What is sure is that by virtue of their age, and with their age comes some peculiar vulnerabilities, and that is going to require a lot of time and love and devotion, protection, the provision that is required um, for children. So if you look at it from that perspective, they are certainly going to demand a lot of your time, your energy, your resources. But too often in marriages, I believe, when a child is born and we begin to rear children, I believe that so often tremendous attention is focused on the children to the detriment of the relationship. So married couples need to be deliberate, I believe, about how they manage the needs of their children while at the same time managing the needs of each spouse. So I don't believe that children are necessarily the most important in the family, but of course their peculiar vulnerabilities demand a lot of attention at that particular age. So it's a matter of creating the right balance, because each spouse still have their needs, and those needs need to be catered to at the same time.
Yeah, I also agree with you. I read this article from John Roseman from 2007. I think it was in the Napa Daily News, where he talked about children are wonderful to have, but they can serve as a distraction. When couples are meant to be working on themselves, they are easily, understandably, lovingly distracted by the children and putting their marriage and that relationship on the back burner. So do subscribe.
And marriages end up failing just because of this reason.
Exactly so. Yeah. And that's a unique thing. It's an unpopular opinion because we want to be loving, devoting parents. And when anything diverts from that, I think society, we assume that they maybe judge us negatively if our children are not the end all be all, if they're not the center of our universe, but they should not be the center of our marriages.
Yes, precisely.
I agree. I want to talk a little bit like culturally, something that is also uncommon. Well, I wouldn't say uncommon. It's uncommon in the Western world, but outside of that, it is not uncommon to have maybe 2 or 3 generation, maybe up to 4 generation live under the same house, the same roof together. And I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about your background, your heritage, mine as well, especially for a newly wed couple. How do you navigate that? How do you ensure that your marriage have a long-standing precedent with multiple generations, not just your children, but your parents, his parents, grandparents, all under the same roof?
And that's a very interesting question. Let me refer to the scriptures here. I like to quote this, especially in premarital counseling. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, where it says, "For this reason shall a man leave his father and his mother, and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." So primarily, I believe it's an issue of, on one hand, attachment versus detachment, and or need to recognize that once a spouse comes into the mainframe, that we have a responsibility to create this detachment from the parents and other extended family members. But having said that, I believe that in a number of cases, it is the socioeconomic conditions that allows for married couples to remain under the same roof, with other members of their families. And of course, every attempt during premarital counseling, you share this perspective that every attempt should be made for the couples to strive for independence. And this is a crucial part, I believe, of relationships. And so even before the marriage, there has to be some sort of discussion around the whole issue of establishing independence. And independence doesn't mean that you're going to cut off your family members. No, because they are an important part of your support system. But invariably, one of the spouse, of course, in this arrangement, is going to be among in-laws. And that's something we have to think about. And by virtue of that, there are times when things don't work out. I've seen where things don't work out as fairly well as the couples would have liked. Of course, it may work out, but there are times when it becomes a nightmare situation where, because someone says you really prefer for your in-laws to remain your in-laws as opposed to your outlaws. All right. And we've seen where just by virtue of sharing the same space, it has led to breakdown of marriages. So in premarital counseling, one of the areas to explore is always the area of finances. That's a huge issue in marriages. And of course, that is going to lead to how independent you can become, because a lot of things hinge on this variable. So if couples are in this kind of situation, I'm not saying it is the ideal, but the goal should not be to remain, but to work out a time frame, a strategy as to how we're going to create some level of independence, detachment, and establish our union without that kind of context, because so often you have interference in the marriage, and that can become something dangerous.
I agree. It doesn't matter how well intending the interference is, it tends to influence the relationship with another voice and another opinion, and it becomes almost a trifecta versus a duality, right?
Precisely.
So I personally, working with couples, we would work on understanding attachment styles, because as much as finances play a part of that, the ability to successfully detach is also a big thing.
Yes.
The safety and security that comes with having your beloved there tends to keep people there, and it doesn't motivate them enough to move forward. So definitely something to have discussed before getting married. Speaking of, I wanted to know, over the past few years, have you find that a lot of couples, very many of them, are coming to premarital counseling?
Interesting question. My own observation, and certainly as a pastor, I'm seeing less. I'm seeing less persons coming for premarital counseling. I'm also seeing less persons coming for marital counseling. And of course, the number of marriages may be down nationally. So I don't know if that is a reflection of, but there are persons who believe that, don't necessarily subscribe to this idea of premarital counseling. You know, one noted psychologist here in Jamaica has publicly said that if two persons come to him to say, we have set the date for our marriage, he says to them, you're going to have to reconsider if you want for me to be the counselor, because there are some things that are likely to be unearthed that after we are through, you may just decide that you are going to call it quits on this whole marriage idea. So I'm seeing less persons coming. And there are some persons who do not subscribe to premarital counseling and feel that, once they get married, they of themselves can navigate all of the challenges. But also, during marriage, I'm also seeing less persons coming for premarital counseling. It doesn't mean, however, that they are not experiencing significant challenges, because in conversations, you recognize that there are a whole host of challenges. But I find in my experience as a pastor that the predominantly where premarital counseling is needed, it is the female, it is the wife who is normally the one to reach out. And sometimes it's hard to make any progress when it's only one person who is willing to present herself for counseling because the male predominantly is unwilling, and it makes the process so much more difficult. So that is what my observation, my experience has informed me over the last few years.
Yeah, I can see that, especially with COVID, that has put a lot of hinges on people's wedding plans and just
Mhm.
uh, their ability to get married all together with all of the restriction. But even before that, we've noticed a slowing of marriages and people coming to premarital therapy, even on my side. I wanted
Okay.
to be able to talk a little bit about clients, even when, well, individuals, even when they find themselves accessing counseling, are you noticing it's a measure of maybe slowing the projected divorce? Maybe they're already in severe damage. When do people show up to counseling?
Um, yes, interesting perspective. Uh, the norm, I think, for us, or our general approach is to try. And when we've tried everything and we've come to the end of our resources, we seek intervention. And I've seen most of the cases I've seen, um, it is pretty close to divorce. It's more closer to that spectrum than just an initial challenge being experienced. And you know, there's one noted counselor, who quite bluntly said to a couple, at the point at which they came, that there is absolutely nothing he could do to save their marriage. And I felt that that was quite blunt as a counselor. But the reality is, at the point to which they come, um, we find that a lot of times the damage is so bad, and of course, I'm not going to say it is irreversible, but there are so many things to work through, and sometimes they don't have the patience to work through it. So I would encourage couples. I would encourage couples that you don't wait until things have gotten so bad and you perceive that it is irreparable, that you come to the table to engage in counseling. Of course, start the process much earlier. And the question is, how early is early? But of course, you can always find a counselor to reach out to and to begin having this initial discussion for intervention.
Yeah, this is one good thing about premarital therapy or counseling in this
Mhm.
case, because it tells you a really good sense of where your tolerance level lie. What are some of your hard boundaries? What are some things that you're able to live through, get over in such a way? And without that pre-knowledge, it's very difficult for people to really know where their cutoff is.
Right.
And then they're passionate, they really want to live through and survive through whatever it is, so they just keep plugging at it, they just
Mhm,
keep plugging at
mhm.
it, knowing that they're doing perhaps irreplaceable damage, creating such a wide injury gap that, you're
Right.
right, is hard to bridge.
Mhm.
Now, people expect when you come to marital therapy with a therapist or pastoral counseling for marriage with a pastor, that we're supposed to be these miracle workers. You're the expert in a room, you fix
Mhm,
it.
mhm, mhm.
You fix it. And that is not
Precisely.
necessarily true. If you're going to a world renowned surgeon to fix your heart, if the damage is already done, there's only so much he can do, right? And,
Precisely. Precisely.
we don't put that pressure on any other profession to fix it,
Mhm, mhm.
right? Like we do with
True.
other professions. This makes me think of the fragility of marriage that so many of us misunderstand and take for granted. This is something that we have to nurture and be able to ensure that we protect it at all costs. Do you agree with that?
Precisely. Well, in terms of fragility, um, it's a yes and no situation. Um, Fragile in the sense that you have two different persons, two different personalities, trying at best to navigate all the idiosyncrasies, on both sides, and just to meet each other in a context of love to make this work. So in that sense, it's fragile, but on the other hand, I also believe, and you spoke about doing what is necessary. And so I believe that, from very early, and you talk about premarital counseling, from very early, I believe what needs to be done is that we need to keep the eyes of couples on what it takes to have a strong marriage, what it takes to have a marriage that can work. And I like to refer to the pillars, the foundations of a strong relationship, of a strong um, marriage. Because just love by itself, the Bible says it covers a multitude of sins, but just by itself, it is not going to allow everything else to work out. So love certainly has to be that first pillar, through which you navigate through so many other things. But there needs to be, issues of trust, personal integrity, the ability to communicate, with each other, being non-judgmental, accepting each other for who the person is. Not saying that there are not issues there that needs to be, worked on and improved. Issues of respect and understanding and forgiveness and patience and compromise. I could go on, but these are some of the issues we have to focus on in marriage. Because marriage, if you work on the character of each person, I believe that you are more likely to have a stronger marriage rather than placing emphasis on the things that are usually acquired um, during marriage. So I think, yes, it is fragile, but if we focus on what the pillars are and seek to always ensure that nothing destabilizes these pillars, we are on our way to not making our marriages fragile, but marriages that can actually stand the test of time. Will it be perfect? No, but they'll be able to weather the storms that will come in your relationships.
Well put. I can listen to you speak all day. Speaking about these pillars, if other people want to be able to get in contact with you, learn from you, maybe even join your fellowship, how do people get in contact with you?
All right. My email address is thirst, as in thirsty, for the number four, Christ dot dj at gmail.com. And of course, my telephone number, easy to reach on WhatsApp, 876 504 4402. And New Hope Ministries, the church pastor, is in Junction, St. Elizabeth. Of course, that's Jamaica. Main Street Junction, St. Elizabeth, at B Complex Medical. So I can be reached from that telephone number or email, and we can always start the journey from that point of view.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I'm going to put mine's and Mr. James's contact in the description box below. I want to thank you so much for joining and for educating us on such a topic that requires sustainability. And knowledge is the way to be able to sustain that as we grow and evolve. We need this type of information. So as we close, I want to be able to recap that we said marriage is hard work, but I think he alluded to the love and the passion that goes into that. He mentioned there's no place else he would rather be than being a husband and a father, and I completely agree with that. This conversation called to your attention pastoral counseling and also a therapeutic approach. Please, please, please hear us say that both are effective, and it's so important that if nothing else you get from this conversation, that you do not wait until your marriage is in irreparable damages or states before you reach out for help. There's support there. There's people that are passionate and willing to sit with you and counsel you through and make sure that you can get to the other side of restoration or healing, or maybe even just bliss and joy, because not every time people come in for marital therapy or counseling, it's because they're within crisis. I usually tell my clients, think of your marriage like a car, and they go, what, like a car? Well, yeah, you go get your car check up, your oil change, your tire rotated. What is it scheduled every 6 months, every 3 months, every so many miles? Go check in. How are we doing? How are we doing intimately? How are we doing emotionally? Am I understanding you? Are we speaking the same language? Right. So to be able to have a neutral party in the room to help navigate that conversation is one of those interventions that will ensure that your marriage lasts as long as you desire it to, by God's grace, of course. Right. Yeah. I want to thank you for being here, sharing your knowledge. And until next time, that's it for Conversations with Dr. Garraway. Bye.